Hello everyone. In this video, I would like to talk about two crisis poems that were written by the great romantic poet William Wordsworth. He was a British romantic poet. The first poem was written in 1798, and the second poem was written between 1802 and 1804. But first, what do we mean by a crisis poem? William Wordsworth actually wrote a book-length autobiographical poem called The Prelude, which is a gigantic crisis poem. But he also wrote short ones. And in a crisis poem, the poet goes through a crisis that is not physical. It's not like he's been, robbed or kidnapped. He's going through a spiritual and perceptual crisis. There's been a change in the way that he interfaces with nature, with the world, even with himself. Something has caused a breach or a disturbance in that connection. And in the poem, he tries to find a resolution to that crisis that will not only heal it, but allow the poet to grow beyond it, so that after the crisis, he finds a resolution that makes things actually better. I think these are two of the most human poems ever written. The first poem we will look at is called Tintern Abbey, and the second is called the Intimations Ode. Now, in Tintern Abbey, the poet, after being in the city of London for 5 years where he felt trapped and stifled, has returned to his beloved Lake District in England, an area that's not too far from Wales, not too far from the moors where Wuthering Heights takes place. And in the beginning of the poem, he tells us about how when he was imprisoned, as he felt, in the city, whenever he remembered the beautiful Lake District, the Wye Valley, and this place called Tintern Abbey, the ruins of an old abbey, whenever he meditated on it, it would bring him tranquil restoration. In fact, as he meditated on those images, it almost took him out of himself so that he became a living soul. But I want to look briefly at the center part of this poem when Wordsworth has his crisis and resolution. As he stands on a hill above Tintern Abbey, looking down at the landscape, he also surveys his early childhood and his early interactions with Tintern Abbey and the natural setting of it. And he says, as he looks down, "Though changed, no doubt, from what I was when first I came among these hills, when like a roe I bounded o'er the mountains, by the sides of the deep rivers and the lonely streams, wherever nature led, more like a man flying from something that he dreads than one who sought the thing he loved. For nature then, the coarser pleasures of my boyish days, and their glad animal movements all gone by, to me was all in all. I cannot paint what then I was. The sounding cataract haunted me like a passion. The tall rock, the mountain, and the deep and gloomy woods, their colors and their forms were then to me an appetite, a feeling, a love that had no need of a remoter charm by thought supplied, nor any interest unborrowed from the eye." Again, this is Tintern Abbey, and I just read line 65 until about line 80. And he remembers how in the very beginning, when he was a very little lad, he speaks of the glad animal movements when it was absolutely purely physical. But most of what I just read is the young Wordsworth, 10, 11, 12, even into his early teen years, whose intercourse with nature was much more physical than it was intellectual. He compares himself to a roe, a deer, leaping back and forth, and all of nature just impressed itself upon him. A cataract is a fancy word for a waterfall. And the sounding cataract, the woods, the mountains, all of it was something that he apprehended directly. It was an appetite, a feeling, a love that he fed on. He didn't need to think about it intellectually. He merely experienced it directly. All of his interest was directly physical, directly made through the senses. And again, all of nature was being taken into him directly, almost like food. But now that he is older, although when I say older, he's actually about 28 when he wrote this poem. But now that he's older, he has lost some of that direct, unmediated, spontaneous intercourse with nature that he once had. And that loss of that direct perceptual experience causes a crisis. And he says it in these few but moving lines, starting about line 83. And he speaks of that time when he was a child, and he says, "That time is past, and all its aching joys are now no more, and all its dizzy raptures." Suddenly he feels that the direct love of nature he had, which was an appetite, which was a feeling and a love, all that aching rapture, that dizzy joy, all of it seems to be gone. Now, I would argue that every one of us will go through this crisis once in our life, and perhaps 3 times. All of us will go through this because we all, unless we die as a child, will have to make that transition from the child's direct, enthusiastic, spontaneous intercourse with nature to the adult who somehow feels like he's lost that spontaneity. But you know, that will happen to us again if we get married. We all go through the honeymoon period when loving and surrendering to the other person is so easy. It's direct. We don't have to think about it. We don't even have to work for it. But for all of us, the honeymoon period doesn't last forever. There comes a time when those warm fuzzies, when that direct sense of joy, that surrender, that easy feeling experience goes away. And either we give up on the marriage or we work hard to find a deeper love and a deeper romance. But it gets more difficult. The honeymoon period ends, and now we have to find a kind of romance that is not simply immediate and spontaneous. If, like myself, you're a Christian, you will go through that experience a 3rd time. A lot of people who become Christians speak of that early moment, that early born-again experience, as the honeymoon period, when it's so easy to love God and surrender to God and obey to God, and God just overwhelms us with feelings, with warm fuzzies. But for all believers, there comes a time when that easy honeymoon period goes away, and we either give up our faith or we move into a deeper relationship with Christ that is still emotional, but that also has a more intellectual and theological content that allows for grief and sorrow and even feelings of melancholy when we feel disconnected from God. But if we are going to move on and mature in our life, in our marriage, in our faith, then we have to go through the crisis and find something deeper. Let me step back and say those crisis lines again, followed by lines of resolution. That time is past, and all its aching joys are now no more, and all its dizzy raptures. Not for this faint eye, nor mourn, nor murmur, other gifts have followed. For such loss I would believe abundant recompense. Now, recompense is like our word compensation. We lose something, something's taken away from us, but it's compensated by something better. Wordsworth says here, claims here, announces here, right, that he's not only found recompense, he's not only found something that will take the place of that lost spontaneity, but he calls it abundant recompense. It is recompense and something more. Wordsworth is very much the poet of abundant recompense, and he will go on in these famous lines to explain how something even better has followed. And starting at line about 88, he says, "For I have learned to look on nature, not as in the hour not as in the thoughtless hour of youth, but hearing oftentime the still, sad music of humanity, nor harsh nor grating, but of ample power to chasten and subdue. And I have felt a presence that disturbs me with the joy of elevated thoughts, a sense sublime of something far more deeply interfused, whose dwelling is the light of setting suns and the round ocean and the living air and the blue sky and in the mind of man. You see, now when he looks at nature, he intuits something, he feels something, he senses something that is deeper than that direct spontaneity he felt as a youth. It's something that he calls something far more deeply interfused. It is something that is not pure joy in the childish sense of joy, for it includes the still sad music of humanity. There is a melancholy, there is a sense of loss. It is a sense that even chastens and subdues him. But it brings with it, again, a deeper kind of understanding, a deeper kind of connection that goes beyond the childish spontaneity. It is the peace Jesus offers, the peace that surpasses all understanding, the shalom peace that is deeper, that is not just the absence of strife, but a deep peace and joy that cannot be disturbed even by human loss and human suffering. This is a deeper and more mature connection that Wordsworth achieves by going through the crisis and finding a resolution that brings not only recompense, but abundant recompense. And now that presence he senses in the wood is not just there, but it is in the sky, it is in the ocean, and it is in the mind of man. And he calls it a motion and a spirit that impels all thinking things, all objects of all thought, and rolls through all things. It is a deeper power that inhabits everything, not only nature, but the mind of man. And now the more mature Wordsworth feels a connection to it, something deeper that his simple childhood pleasure was unaware of. And that's why he can conclude, therefore, because of all this, therefore am I still a lover of the meadows and the woods and the mountains and of all that we behold from this green earth, of all the mighty world of eye and ear, both what they half create and what perceive, well pleased to recognize in nature and the language of the sense, the anchor of my purest thoughts, the nurse, the guide, the guardian of my heart and soul of all my moral being. Now he finds something that is in nature, but which he also perceives and partly projects in nature. This is now a mature interaction with the natural world and the deeper spirit, the divine that is in nature. And now because of that, he can recognize in all of nature something deeper, something that is a nurse, a governess, a guide, something that guards his heart and is the soul of all his moral being. An odd thing to say because he's speaking of nature, but he is now perceiving something deeper in nature, something divine. And so he has lost that unthinking spontaneity, but he has gained a deeper connection with nature, himself, and ultimately a deeper connection with God. That is Tintern Abbey. 4 years later, in 1802, he started an ode. It's called Ode, Intimations of Immortality from Recollections of Early Childhood, but it's more commonly known as the Intimations Ode. And this ode is another crisis poem, but on a much deeper level than Tintern Abbey. In fact, as we'll see quickly here, he goes through a miniature crisis, a small crisis, followed by a larger crisis. And he begins the poem using the past tense, letting us understand right from the beginning that something has been lost. Stanza 1 of the Intimations Ode. There was a time when meadow, grove, and stream, the earth and every common sight, to me did seem apparelled in celestial light, the glory and the freshness of a dream. It is not now as it hath been of yore. Turn wheresoe'er I may, by night or day, the things which I have seen, I now can see no more. There was a time when he was young, when the whole world seemed bathed in a celestial light, as if there were a corona, not coronavirus, but the corona or halo around the sun, as if everything was new and fresh. There was glory. He perceived everything in the world. But now suddenly, the things which I have seen, I now can see no more. He has suddenly lost a connection, not only with nature, but with the glory and the halo that seemed to cover everything. And maybe you remember when you were a child and everything seemed enchanted and filled with mystery and divine presence. But suddenly, the older poet, now 32, suddenly feels disconnected. As if there was something I saw, but I don't see it anymore. And then he goes back and says, oh, no, the rainbow comes and goes, and lovely as the rose, the moon. He goes on, everything is wonderful. And yet, again, at line 15, but yet I know where'er I go, that there hath passed away a glory from the earth. Something that was so present when he was younger seems to be gone. A freshness, a glow seems to be gone. But then in stanza 3, now while the birds thus sing a joyous song, and while the young lambs bound as to the tabor's sound, to me alone there came a thought of grief. A timely utterance gave that thought relief, and I again am strong. The cataracts blow their trumpets from the steep. No more shall grief of mine the season wrong. So in the moment of his crisis, what he calls a timely utterance comes. Some Wordsworth critics tie that to a poem. It may not be a poem, but suddenly an utterance, a word, maybe a divine word comes, and once again he feels connected. And so he can join. And in the 4th stanza, there is a festival going around him. He's in a park perhaps, and children are running back and forth, and he feels connected to everything around him. Stanza 4, he says, oh, ye blessed creatures, I have heard the call ye to each other make. I see the heavens laugh with you in your jubilee. My heart is at your festival. My head hath its coronal. The fullness of your bliss I feel it all. He's connected again. O evil day, if I were sullen while earth herself is adorning this sweet May morning, and the children are culling on every side in 1,000 valleys far and wide, fresh flowers while the sun shines warm, and the babe leaps up on his mother's arm. I hear, with joy I hear. How wonderful now, connected, the child, everything, the laughter, it's all part of himself. And he feels a direct sympathy with it. Although he says, oh, evil day, if ever I would not be able to connect with what is going on. And that's what happens. Here in stanza 4, about line 50, the crisis returns. He says, but there's a tree of many one, a single field which I have looked upon. Both of them speak of something that is gone. The pansy at my feet doth the same tale repeat. Whither is fled the visionary gleam? Where is it now, the glory and the dream? And so that initial crisis, the thing which I have seen and now can see no more, was suddenly resolved. And he goes to the park, he joys with the children, everything. But then suddenly, as we say, it returns with a vengeance. It may only be one tree or one field, but suddenly he realizes, no, that glory, that dream, that corona around the sun is gone. Something is missing. The visionary gleam, which seemed to make all nature divine, celestial, all of it suddenly is gone. What has happened? Now, Wordsworth wrote those 4 stanzas in 1802, and then uncharacteristically, he put it down and could not finish this short poem. Long poems, he had a hard time. But he couldn't finish this short ode, this reflection or meditation on his own interaction with nature. He couldn't finish it and put it down for 2 years until in 1804, he picked it up again and was able to resolve it. But he was only able to resolve it by means of an old Platonic idea called the pre-existence of the soul. This is a concept that's not biblical, but I wouldn't exactly call it unbiblical. Reincarnation is incompatible with Scripture. But what if before God created our body, he created our soul? And what if our soul existed in heaven briefly before it entered our body? And with this idea that again goes back to Plato, at least in the Western world, Wordsworth was able to move towards a fuller resolution of this loss of the glory he used to see in nature. He explains it this way in stanza 5. Our birth is but a sleep and a forgetting. The soul that rises with us, our life star, hath had elsewhere its setting, and cometh from afar. Not in entire forgetfulness, and not in utter nakedness, but trailing clouds of glory do we come from God, who is our home. This is a poem, but it's also a philosophical refutation of John Locke. John Locke famously said that we are born as a tabula rasa, a white sheet or a blank slate. When we're born, there's nothing, and then everything we know comes to us merely by our senses. This is a philosophical theory called empiricism that says we are a blank slate, we're empty, and everything that's written on us comes only through our 5 senses. We're not born with some kind of intuition or previous sense of life. We're a blank slate. Wordsworth says no. Wordsworth as a romantic says no. We are born with eternity already written on our hearts, to quote Ecclesiastes. We come from God, and even I think even if our soul wasn't pre-existent, we come a desire for God and for heaven, a desire for Eden has been written on our hearts. I believe that we all have a antenatal or prenatal memory of Eden. Yes, we all participate in Adam's fall in Christian theology, but if we participate in his fall, we must also participate in that brief period when Adam lived in Eden, what was meant to be our true home. So I don't believe we're a blank slate. I believe we are born with something before. Sorry about that. I believe that we are all born with a memory of Eden and a memory of something we've lost. Well, for Wordsworth here, he's trying to use this to explain to himself why it is when we're a child, everything seems magical. I remember my little kids fascinated by looking up at fans with lights, and I'm wondering if they're remembering the angel wings from their pre-existence. But when we're young, everything seems so young and fresh and new, and somehow we lose that. As we grow up, we lose that sense that everything around us is glorious and magical and full of wonder. He says, as we age, shades of the prison house begin to close upon the growing boy. But he beholds the light, and whence it flows, he sees it in his joy. The youth who daily farther from the east must travel, still is nature's priest, and by the vision splendid is on his way attended. At length the man perceives it die away, and fade into the light of common day. So what happens is that we lose our memory, we lose our sense of freshness, and suddenly the magic and wonder and beauty that we used to see is gone, and everything seems ordinary. We've seen it so often. We say we don't stop and smell the roses. That's because we don't notice them anymore. We don't notice the magic of roses, the magic of the moon, the magic of the stars, and everything becomes ordinary. And Wordsworth actually goes on to say that nature, as our nurse or governess, that nature actually helps to make us forget the pre-existence of our soul, to help us forget the glory we once knew. And she doesn't do it because she's cruel, but she does it to acquaint us or acclimate us to this world. Otherwise, we would always be unhappy. We would never quite fit in. We'd have too much of a longing. And so nature sort of takes that longing out of us a little bit to accustom us to living in this world. And then he goes on in the long stanza 7 to talk about how as we grow, we learn by imitating. We act like our parents. We act like people we see. And the more we con apart, the more we imitate, the more we mature in one way. But at the same way, we lose that original freshness as we become too much a part of this world. And now in stanza 8, Wordsworth is still, imagine him at the festival, and he's looking at a child. And he's saying these words to a very small child. Thou, O child, stanza 8, whose exterior semblance doth belie thy soul's immensity. Thou best philosopher, who yet dost keep thy heritage, thou eye among the blind, that, deaf and silent, reads the eternal deep, haunted forever by the eternal mind. Mighty prophet, seer blessed. Now, there are times when it's very easy to make fun of William Wordsworth, and this is one of those times. Is he saying that a child is a mighty prophet, a seer blessed, that he is the true philosopher? What does he mean by this? He knows that philosophy means a friend or lover of wisdom. And a true philosopher, going back to Plato, is not so much interested in the relative truths of our world. The true philosopher is seeking after what Plato called the forms. Truth with a capital T, beauty with a capital B, goodness with a capital G, justice with a capital J. And what he's saying is that the child, because he still remembers his pre-existence, is actually closer to those forms, to the things that are really real and truly true. The child is actually closer to those things and knows them directly. He is the eye among the blind. The blind are we, the adults who have lost that close and intimate connection. And now all we see are the imitations in our world, and we've lost our perception, direct perception of the forms. He says to the child, O ye on whom these truths do rest, which we are toiling all our lives to find, in darkness lost, the darkness of the grave. That which we adults seek so hard to find, that direct connection, the child knows now. And we used to know it now, but we lost it. And then he goes on in one of the terrible ironies. He says, "O child, why do you seek so hard to grow up? Because in growing up, in maturing in the earthly sense of the word, you are actually losing that connection. And so you are trying so hard, child, to lose that very thing that when you're an adult, you'll ache and yearn for the rest of your adult life." He says, child, don't rush to grow up. Full soon thy soul shall have her earthly freight, and custom lie upon thee with a weight heavy as frost and deep almost as life. Don't rush so fast to do away with that childlike joy and wonder and awe and even reverence. Enjoy it now. And here's the irony. The child who has that direct perception lacks the skill of the adult to write it into a poem. Whereas the adult who has the skill of writing a poem has lost the direct apprehension he had as a child. And so there's a terrible, terrible irony. And that, in a sense, he's now explained where the crisis comes from, that loss of perception, that glory in the dream he no longer sees. But is there some kind of solution? Is there any hope? He now understands the crisis, but how does he resolve it? Stanza 9, he says, with great joy and triumph, "Oh, joy, that in our embers is something that doth live, that nature yet remembers what was so fugitive." Wait a minute. It's not completely gone. In the smoldering embers, one spark may remain. That was an old Nat King Cole song I just quoted. In the embers that we've lost, there's still a light down there. We haven't completely lost. There are still intimations, still little remembrances, little moments of joy, as C.S. Lewis would call them, that remind us of what we lost. He says, "The thought of our past years, of my childhood, in me doth breed perpetual benediction," blessing and thanks. He is continually thankful for his childhood. Why? First, he tells us, why not? He says it's not really indeed for that which is most worthy to be blessed, delight and liberty, the simple creed of childhood, whether busy or at rest, with new-fledged hope and still fluttering in his breast. No, those are good things, but not for these I raise the song of thanks and praise. He's thankful for his child, and he remembered the freedom and enjoyment, but there's something deeper that makes him feel perpetual thanks for his childhood. And here is what it is. He says, but for those obstinate, if it wasn't for something we experienced in our childhood, and it wasn't for those obstinate questionings of sense and outward things, fallings from us, vanishings, blank misgivings of a creature moving about in worlds not realized, high instincts before which our mortal nature did tremble like a guilty thing surprised. He's remembering back, and I don't know if you all remember this when you were a child, but when he was a child, he sensed that there was something more than the world. Like he was an orphan cut off from something more wonderful. Here was the world, but it didn't quite seem real. The child kept sensing something beyond the love of fairy tales, something shimmering behind the world, and the child would never quite accept it. No, this can't be all there is. There must be something beyond it. It's not just a religious sense, it's a perceptual sense, a sense of some kind of deeper and richer glory. And so the child never quite accepts the boundaries of the physical world. And he says, but for, again, if it were not for those first affections, those shadowy recollections of something beyond nature, which, be they what they may, are yet the fountain light of all our day, are yet a master light of all our seeing, uphold us, cherish, and have power to make our noisy years see moments in the being of the eternal silence, truths that wake to perish never. Okay, C.S. Lewis said, I believe in Christianity like I believe in the rising sun, not only because I see it, but because by it I see everything else. The sun allows us to see everything else. Lewis claimed that Christianity explains and allows him to understand everything else. It's a complete, coherent worldview, I would say, as an apologist. Well, here it is our intimations of immortality, our recollections of early childhood, of that indomitable feeling that there was something beyond nature. It is those intimations that are the sun that allow us to see everything else, especially if you're a philosopher or poet. It is your, again, intimations of immortality from your recollections of early childhood. As you remember those things you lost, it gives you, the adult, an intimation of something more, something immortal. And that is what allows us to continue to feel and to reach and to wonder. And it is that, as Wordsworth said, the child is father of the man. That seems to be an oxymoron, but the man builds on the child's perceptions. And because of this, he says, which neither listlessness nor mad endeavor, nor man nor boy, nor all that is in enmity with joy, can utterly abolish or destroy. Because we have those memories, and that's why Alzheimer's is a very scary disease for a romantic who focuses so much on memory and how that memory rejuvenates him. But because of that, because of those recollections, he can say triumphantly, hence, in a season of calm weather, though inland far we be, our souls have sight of that immortal sea, which brought us hither, can in a moment travel thither, and see the children sport upon the shore, and hear the mighty waters rolling evermore. Hence, in a season of calm weather, when I feel peace and tranquility, I, Wordsworth, can look far back to the east, where we were born, can look back to the original state when the child perceived things and he can almost catch sight of them. Those children sporting on the shore. And notice he appears to the eye and see the children sport and hear suddenly his eyes can see again and his ears can hear again. And he has a perception, a glimpse of the glory that seemed to have been lost, but wasn't really lost. It's still there. And the adult can still tap those intimations. And so in verse 10, he can say more triumphantly than he did in the beginning of the poem, because this is the second crisis and the greater resolution. Then sing, ye birds, sing a joyous song, and let the young lambs bound as to the tabor's sound. We in thought will join your throng, ye that pipe and ye that play, ye that through your hearts today feel the gladness of the May. What though the radiance which was once so bright be now forever taken from my sight? Though nothing can bring back the hour of splendor in the grass, of glory in the flower, we will grieve not, rather find strength in what remains behind, in the primal sympathy which having been must ever be, in the soothing thoughts that spring out of human suffering, in the faith that looks through death, in years that bring the philosophic mind. This is even more mature and acceptance, but a discovery of abundant radiance, of abundant recompense. He must accept that nothing can bring back the hour of splendor in the grass, of glory in the flower. I can't bring that back. That direct, unmediated spontaneity as the child cannot be completely brought back. I can't simply go back. Nothing can bring back the fullness of that childhood glimpse. By the way, watch a beautiful movie called Splendor in the Grass with Natalie Wood and Warren Beatty. And it is about them dealing with the loss of that childhood love and romance. The title comes from this. I can't get that back. Still, I will grieve not, right? No, not for this mourn I nor murmur, he said in Tintern Abbey, the first poem we looked at. I can't bring that back, but I will not grieve. Instead, I will find strength in what remains behind. It's still there. I will tap it. I don't have that overwhelming honeymoon period of my marriage or of my relationship with Christ, but I will find something deeper. I will still tap that. I will find that strength again in the primal sympathy which having been must ever be, in the soothing thoughts that spring out of human suffering, right? In the faith that looks through death. I have a deeper, more mature. I can now maintain my joy even in the face of death, and therefore I will gain what he calls the philosophic mind, a mind that can pierce through death and melancholy and loss and still find the joy and connection. Yes, I have lost something, but I have found abundant recompense. And that's why in the end of the poem, he says, because of the human heart by which we live, thanks to its tenderness that enjoys its fears, To me, the meanest flower that blows can give thoughts that do often lie too deep for tears. Now, because of that memory and the way I'm able to access it, I have found a deeper joy. And now the meanest flower, in other words, the most ordinary thing in nature, out of something that someone would overlook because it seems so everyday, even in that, I can find thoughts that often lie too deep for tears. I encourage you all to find that maturity, to move from crisis to resolution to abundant recompense. Do it in your lives, do it in your marriages, and if you're a Christian, do it in terms of your faith in Christ.